Some people are surrounded by crowds, yet feel completely unseen. And some walk alone, but carry a depth that terrifies shallow minds. What if your loneliness is not proof that something is wrong with you? What if it is evidence that you were never meant to fit into ordinary connections? Stay with me until the end, because the final trait may completely change the way you see yourself, your isolation, and the reason certain people could never truly understand you. One of the rarest qualities a human being can possess today is the ability to value depth in a world completely addicted to attention. Everywhere you look, people are encouraged to speak more, post more, reveal more, and surround themselves with as many connections as possible, even if those connections have no emotional meaning at all. Modern society celebrates visibility more than sincerity. It rewards those who can entertain quickly, impress instantly, and maintain endless superficial interactions. But there are certain people who feel strangely disconnected from this entire system. No matter how hard they try, they cannot convince themselves that shallow conversations are enough. They cannot pretend that constant social interaction automatically creates emotional closeness. Something inside them keeps searching for substance, honesty, emotional intelligence, and real understanding. And because of that, they often end up with fewer friendships than everyone around them. You may have noticed this about yourself long ago. You can sit in a crowded room filled with laughter, noise, and endless conversation, yet still feel emotionally alone. Not because you hate people, but because your mind instinctively searches for something deeper than casual interaction. You listen carefully to the way people speak. You notice how many conversations stay trapped on the surface. People talk endlessly without ever saying anything meaningful about their fears, dreams, pain, purpose, or inner struggles. They exchange information, jokes, gossip, and opinions, but rarely reveal their authentic selves. For most individuals, this is normal. They feel comfortable existing within that level of communication. But for someone who values depth, it becomes emotionally exhausting after a while. This is why you may naturally withdraw from large groups or meaningless social environments. It is not arrogance. It is not superiority. It is emotional incompatibility. Your spirit does not feel nourished by interactions that lack honesty and emotional presence. You do not want to spend hours pretending to care about conversations that never reach anything real. You crave moments where masks disappear. You crave conversations where people speak openly about life, fear, healing, failure, growth, loneliness, ambition, regret, and truth. You want to understand people beyond their public personality. You want to know what exists behind the smile, behind the confidence, behind the image they present to the world. And this creates a difficult reality. Most people are not prepared for that level of emotional depth. Many individuals spend their entire lives avoiding themselves internally. They distract themselves constantly because silence makes them uncomfortable. Reflection makes them nervous. Vulnerability feels dangerous to them. So when they meet someone who naturally seeks emotional honesty, they may feel exposed without understanding why. Your questions feel too deep for them. Your presence feels too intense. Your emotional awareness quietly forces them to confront parts of themselves they normally keep hidden, and instead of moving closer to you, they often retreat toward environments that feel easier and less emotionally demanding. People who value depth also tend to observe more than they speak. While others rush to impress, you quietly study behavior, energy, consistency, and emotional maturity. You pay attention to whether someone's actions align with their words. You notice how they treat others when there is nothing to gain. You notice whether they speak with empathy or selfishness. Because of this, you rarely form instant attachments. You cannot create artificial closeness simply for the sake of avoiding loneliness. You would rather spend long periods alone than surround yourself with connections that feel emotionally empty. There is also another painful truth connected to this trait. People who seek depth are often disappointed more frequently than others because they expect emotional sincerity in a world where many relationships are built on convenience. You may enter conversations hoping to discover authenticity, only to realize that most people are performing versions of themselves designed for acceptance. Over time, this repeated disappointment can make you quieter, more selective, more cautious about where you invest your emotional energy. You stop giving everyone unlimited access to your inner world because you realize how few people truly value emotional depth anymore. And yet, despite the loneliness this creates, you still cannot force yourself to become superficial. You cannot train your heart to enjoy meaningless interactions simply because they are socially accepted. Your soul keeps searching for something rare: human connection without performance, affection without manipulation, honesty without fear, and conversations that touch the deepest parts of existence instead of remaining trapped at the level of appearances. One of the most isolating traits a person can carry is the ability to recognize insincerity almost immediately. While many people move through relationships accepting words at face value, you notice things that others completely overlook. You pay attention to tone, timing, body language, inconsistencies, hidden intentions, and emotional contradictions. Even when someone appears friendly on the surface, something inside you quietly observes whether their energy feels genuine or forced. This is not paranoia, it is heightened emotional awareness. And although this trait can protect you from manipulation and betrayal, it can also create a life where very few people ever feel truly safe to trust. You may have experienced moments where everyone around you seemed impressed by someone's charm, confidence, or charisma, yet deep inside you felt uncomfortable without fully understanding why. Other people may have called that person kind, inspiring, trustworthy, or supportive, but your instincts kept warning you to remain careful. Later, time often revealed what your intuition already sensed from the beginning. Perhaps the person turned out to be dishonest, manipulative, jealous, selfish, or emotionally unstable. Experiences like these slowly teach you to trust your inner perception more than appearances, and once that awareness develops strongly enough, it becomes impossible to ignore. This creates a painful distance between you and many social environments. Modern life rewards performance. People are taught to present polished versions of themselves instead of authentic ones. They learn how to smile even when they feel resentment. They learn how to compliment people they secretly envy. They learn how to appear caring while emotionally using others for attention, status, convenience, or validation. In many situations, social interaction becomes less about sincerity and more about maintaining an image. But people like you feel emotionally exhausted around constant performance. Your nervous system notices the tension behind the politeness. Your instincts detect when kindness lacks warmth. Your awareness recognizes when words are carefully designed to create an impression instead of express truth. Because of this, you may often feel disconnected even in ordinary conversations. While others relax easily, your mind quietly analyzes emotional authenticity. You are not searching for perfection in people. You understand that every human being has flaws, fears, and contradictions. What unsettles you is not imperfection, it is deception. You can tolerate weakness much more easily than dishonesty. You can forgive mistakes faster than manipulation. What damages your trust is the feeling that someone is hiding their true intentions behind carefully constructed behavior. This rare sensitivity also means you are affected deeply by emotional inconsistency. When someone acts differently depending on who is present, you notice immediately. When a person speaks kindly in public but cruelly in private, you notice immediately. When compliments feel forced, when concern feels artificial, when affection feels strategic rather than sincere, your intuition reacts before logic fully explains the situation. Many people ignore these signals because they fear loneliness or conflict, but you struggle to silence what your instincts are telling you. Even when you try giving someone the benefit of the doubt, your emotional awareness continues whispering that something is wrong beneath the surface. And this is where loneliness begins to grow. People who sense fake energy quickly often become socially selective without even intending to. You naturally distance yourself from environments filled with gossip, competition, dishonesty, or emotional games. Certain conversations drain you because they feel performative rather than real. Certain people exhaust you because maintaining interaction with them requires ignoring your instincts. Over time, your social circle becomes smaller not because you dislike human connection, but because your soul refuses to settle for relationships built on emotional confusion. There is also another difficult reality connected to this trait. Highly perceptive people often intimidate others unintentionally. Your silence makes people nervous because they feel observed around you. Your emotional awareness creates discomfort in individuals who rely heavily on masks and performance. Some people may even avoid you because they sense that you can see through behaviors they successfully hide from everyone else. Without saying a single word, your presence can make dishonest individuals feel emotionally exposed. And instead of becoming more authentic, many choose distance because distance feels safer than vulnerability. You may have also noticed how exhausting it becomes to pretend you do not sense what you clearly feel. There are moments when your intuition detects jealousy hidden behind support, manipulation hidden behind kindness, or emotional emptiness hidden behind confidence. Yet society often pressures people to ignore these perceptions for the sake of politeness or social harmony. But every time you betray your instincts, something inside you feels unsettled. Your inner world values emotional truth too deeply to comfortably participate in relationships built on illusion. There are people who become uncomfortable the moment silence enters their lives. They constantly need noise, attention, movement, messages, conversations, or social activity because being alone forces them to confront emotions they have spent years avoiding. For them, solitude feels like emptiness. It feels like abandonment. It feels like proof that they are disconnected from the world. But there is another kind of person who experiences solitude very differently. Instead of feeling destroyed by silence, they feel restored by it. Instead of becoming weaker in isolation, they slowly regain emotional clarity, inner balance, and mental strength. These individuals are rare because they do not depend entirely on external stimulation to feel alive. They possess an inner world rich enough to sustain them even when nobody else is present. If you have few friends, one possible reason is that you naturally require periods of solitude in order to function emotionally and mentally. This is not sadness. This is not social failure. It is a different relationship with energy itself. Some people gain energy from constant interaction, while others slowly lose themselves in environments that never become quiet. You may have noticed that after spending too much time around crowds, noise, drama, or endless conversation, your mind feels heavy and exhausted. It is not necessarily because the people are bad. It is because your nervous system absorbs more than most individuals realize. You process emotions deeply. You observe constantly. You feel the emotional atmosphere around you even when nobody says anything directly. And because of this, prolonged social interaction can become mentally draining in ways that others may never understand. Solitude becomes the place where you emotionally recover from the intensity of the outside world. When you are finally alone, something inside you begins to settle. Your thoughts become clearer. Your emotions become easier to understand. The pressure to perform disappears. You no longer have to manage other people's expectations, moods, opinions, or energy. In silence, your real self begins to breathe again. This is why you may sometimes disappear from social environments without explanation. It is not because you hate people, it is because your inner world requires space in order to remain healthy. Many highly reflective individuals experience this without realizing how uncommon it truly is. Society often teaches people that being constantly social is proof of happiness and emotional success. Popularity becomes associated with value. Large friend groups become symbols of importance. Endless social activity becomes something to admire. But what society rarely discusses is how emotionally exhausted many people secretly become while trying to maintain appearances and constant connection. They fear being alone because they never learned how to exist peacefully within themselves. So they keep surrounding themselves with distraction in order to avoid silence. You are different because solitude does not immediately threaten your identity. In many ways, solitude strengthens your connection to yourself. It allows you to think independently instead of absorbing the opinions of the crowd. It allows you to reflect on your emotions instead of burying them beneath stimulation. It allows you to reconnect with your creativity, awareness, memories, goals, and inner truth. Some of the deepest realizations of your life probably arrived during moments when nobody else was around. In silence, you understand yourself more honestly than you ever could in noisy environments. This trait can unintentionally create distance between you and others. People who depend heavily on constant social validation may misunderstand your need for space. They may assume you are distant, cold, antisocial, arrogant, or emotionally detached. They may not understand that your withdrawal has very little to do with rejection and everything to do with restoration. Your soul simply becomes overwhelmed when exposed to too much external energy for too long. You need time alone to process experiences that other people move through quickly without reflection. There is also another reason solitude becomes important for people like you. When you spend enough time alone, you begin developing emotional independence. You stop needing constant approval from others in order to feel complete. You learn how to comfort yourself, motivate yourself, understand yourself, and regulate your emotions without depending entirely on external reassurance. This creates a quiet strength that many people never develop because they spend their entire lives emotionally attached to the reactions of others. And once a person discovers peace within solitude, they become extremely careful about who they allow into their life. Because now relationships are no longer used as emotional escape routes. You no longer seek people simply to avoid loneliness. You seek people whose presence genuinely adds peace, depth, sincerity, and emotional safety to your life. If someone brings chaos, manipulation, superficiality, or emotional exhaustion, being alone suddenly feels far more valuable than maintaining that connection. One of the greatest reasons certain people end up with very few friends is because they eventually reach a point where they can no longer tolerate pretending. From childhood, society quietly trains people to perform versions of themselves that will be accepted by others. They learn which emotions are safe to express and which emotions should remain hidden. They learn how to change their personality depending on the environment they enter. They learn how to suppress opinions in order to avoid conflict. Over time, many individuals become so skilled at adaptation that they slowly lose contact with who they truly are beneath all the performance. They become experts at being liked while secretly feeling disconnected from themselves internally. But there are rare individuals who feel emotionally suffocated whenever they try to live this way for too long. If you have very few close connections, it may be because your soul values authenticity more than approval. You may have tried at different stages of your life to fit into certain groups, relationships, or environments by becoming more agreeable, more entertaining, more socially acceptable, or less emotionally honest. Perhaps you laughed at things you did not truly find funny, Perhaps you stayed silent when something deeply bothered you. Perhaps you tolerated behavior that violated your values simply because you feared rejection or loneliness. But eventually, something inside you became exhausted from constantly betraying your own nature in order to maintain connection. Authentic people experience a unique kind of emotional pain when they pretend for too long. Even if others accept them socially, they still feel internally disconnected because they know the acceptance is based on a version of themselves that is incomplete or false. This creates a silent emptiness that becomes heavier with time. You begin realizing that there is nothing comforting about being surrounded by people who only know your performance, while your real thoughts, emotions, fears, and convictions remain hidden underneath the surface. At some point, many deeply self-aware individuals make a difficult decision. They stop shaping their personality around the expectations of everyone else. They begin speaking more honestly. They become less interested in impressing people. They stop laughing simply to keep social harmony. They stop pretending to agree with opinions that violate their conscience. They stop shrinking themselves to protect fragile egos around them. And the moment this transformation begins, something surprising often happens. Their social circle becomes smaller. This happens because many relationships survive only through mutual performance. Some people are comfortable with you as long as you remain agreeable, predictable, emotionally convenient, or easy to control. But when you begin expressing your authentic self more openly, those relationships become unstable. Certain individuals become uncomfortable when you stop playing the role they assigned to you. They prefer the quieter version of you, the more compliant version, the version that ignored disrespect in order to maintain peace. Authenticity disrupts relationships built on emotional imbalance because truth changes the entire dynamic. You may have already experienced situations where people became distant after you started setting boundaries, expressing honest opinions, or refusing to participate in behavior that felt fake or unhealthy. Suddenly, you were described as difficult, cold, selfish, intense, or changed. But often what truly changed was not your character. What changed was your willingness to abandon yourself for the comfort of others. Many people become uncomfortable when someone stops sacrificing authenticity in exchange for approval because it forces them to confront the ways they themselves continue performing. Authentic individuals also tend to value emotional honesty in relationships at a level that many people are not prepared for. You do not want connections built only on appearances, social convenience, or temporary entertainment. You want relationships where truth can exist safely. You want conversations where people can admit fear, insecurity, confusion, regret, ambition, pain, and vulnerability without hiding behind masks. But creating relationships at that level requires courage, emotional maturity, and self-awareness. And the reality is that many people spend their entire lives avoiding those deeper parts of themselves. There is also a powerful freedom that develops once you stop betraying your authentic self. You begin experiencing peace that cannot be created through social approval alone. You no longer wake up exhausted from maintaining false identities in different environments. You no longer feel trapped by the pressure to constantly impress everyone around you. Your words become more honest. Your decisions become more aligned with your values. Your relationships become fewer, but far more genuine. Because now, the people who remain in your life are not connected to a performance. They are connected to the real person underneath everything society once demanded you hide. One of the rarest and most misunderstood traits a human being can possess is emotional depth. In a world where many people are trained to suppress, distract, or escape their feelings, deeply emotional individuals experience life with an intensity that others often fail to understand. They do not simply observe life from a distance, they absorb it. Every experience enters their inner world with unusual force. Words stay with them longer. Memories affect them more deeply. Beauty touches them intensely. Betrayal wounds them profoundly. Kindness moves them in ways that cannot easily be explained. Because of this heightened emotional sensitivity, they often become extremely selective about the people they allow into their lives. If you have very few friends, one possible reason is that your emotional world operates at a depth that many people cannot comfortably reach. You do not experience relationships casually. You do not attach yourself to people simply because they are available, entertaining, or socially convenient. Your heart searches for sincerity, emotional safety, understanding, and depth of character. You instinctively know that relationships have the power to influence your emotional state profoundly, so you become cautious about who receives access to your inner world. This emotional depth changes the way you experience almost everything in life. A small act of disrespect may stay in your mind for days because you analyze not only what happened, but also the intention and emotional meaning behind it. A moment of genuine compassion may affect you so deeply that you remember it for years. Music may touch emotions inside you that others barely notice. Certain conversations may linger in your soul long after they end. You feel not only your own emotions intensely, but often the emotions of others as well. When someone around you is hurting, angry, anxious, jealous, or emotionally unstable, your nervous system notices immediately. Even when nothing is spoken directly, you sense emotional shifts in the atmosphere around you. Because you feel everything so deeply, superficial relationships become emotionally exhausting. Many people approach friendships casually, moving from one connection to another without much emotional awareness. But for you, every relationship carries emotional weight. Every betrayal cuts deeply. Every disappointment leaves a mark. Every moment of dishonesty damages trust significantly. This is why emotionally deep people often become guarded after repeated emotional pain. It is not because they stop caring. It is because they care too much. They understand how deeply careless people can affect the human heart. You may have already noticed that certain environments drain you faster than they drain others. Loud personalities, emotional games, manipulation, fake kindness, passive aggression, constant criticism, or shallow interaction can feel overwhelming because your emotional system processes those experiences intensely instead of brushing past them. While other people may easily forget negative interactions, your mind continues revisiting them, trying to understand what truly happened beneath the surface. This constant emotional processing can become exhausting, which is why solitude often feels safer than chaotic social environments. Emotionally deep individuals also struggle with pretending. Because your emotions are powerful and genuine, it becomes difficult to fake enthusiasm, affection, trust, or connection when you do not truly feel it. You cannot easily maintain relationships built entirely on appearances because your heart constantly searches for emotional authenticity. You want to feel emotionally seen, emotionally understood, and emotionally valued. Anything less begins to feel empty after a while. Another painful reality about emotional depth is that people often misunderstand it completely. Some may call you overly sensitive simply because you notice emotional details they ignore. Others may accuse you of overthinking because you reflect deeply on experiences that they dismiss quickly. But emotional depth is not weakness, it is awareness. It is the ability to recognize emotional truth beneath surface behavior. Deeply emotional people are often capable of extraordinary empathy, compassion, creativity, and insight precisely because they allow themselves to feel life fully instead of numbing themselves emotionally. At the same time, emotional depth can create loneliness because not everyone knows how to handle a sensitive soul responsibly. Some people take emotional openness for granted. Others become uncomfortable around vulnerability because they have spent years hiding from their own emotions. And many relationships fail simply because one person desires emotional depth while the other only desires comfort, convenience, or distraction. Over time, deeply emotional individuals begin protecting themselves more carefully. They stop opening up quickly. They stop trusting easily. They become highly selective because they understand that emotional intimacy is not something to give casually to people who lack emotional maturity. One of the most painful experiences a person can go through is realizing that they no longer emotionally belong in the environments that once felt familiar. Growth is often described as something beautiful, inspiring, and empowering. But what many people fail to understand is that real personal growth can also feel deeply lonely. Because when your mindset begins changing, your relationships inevitably begin changing as well. The conversations that once entertained you start feeling empty. The habits that once felt normal begin feeling destructive. The people you once connected with naturally may suddenly feel emotionally distant, even if nothing dramatic happened between you. This is one of the clearest signs that your inner world is evolving beyond the environment that once shaped you. If you have few friends, it may not mean that you failed socially. It may simply mean that your awareness outgrew certain relationships that were only compatible with the older version of yourself. Human beings naturally connect through shared values, emotional patterns, interests, priorities, and levels of consciousness. But when one person begins healing, reflecting, maturing, or evolving internally, those connections can slowly weaken without either side fully understanding why. You may still care about those people, yet something no longer feels aligned. The energy changes. The conversations become repetitive. The emotional connection fades. And eventually, you realize you are standing emotionally alone in spaces where you once felt connected. Growth changes what your soul can tolerate. In earlier stages of life, you may have accepted friendships built on gossip, negativity, emotional inconsistency, superficial entertainment, or constant validation. You may have ignored red flags because you feared loneliness. You may have stayed connected to people simply because history existed between you. But growth slowly sharpens your emotional awareness. You begin recognizing which interactions drain your peace and which ones nourish your spirit. You begin understanding that not every familiar connection is healthy simply because it has existed for a long time. This realization often creates internal conflict. Part of you wants to hold on to old relationships because they represent comfort, memories, and belonging. But another part of you understands that remaining emotionally attached to environments that no longer align with your growth can slowly destroy your peace. And this is where many people become trapped. They continue forcing themselves to remain connected to relationships that no longer reflect who they are becoming, simply because they are afraid of standing alone during the transition into a new version of themselves. But growth frequently requires temporary isolation. There are seasons in life where you emotionally separate from old environments before new, meaningful connections arrive. During this period, loneliness can feel intense because you are no longer fully connected to your past, yet not fully connected to your future either. You exist in between identities, between relationships, between emotional worlds. Many people misunderstand this phase and assume something is wrong with them because their social circle becomes smaller while their self-awareness becomes larger. You may have noticed this happening gradually in your own life. Topics that once excited you no longer hold your attention. Certain behaviors now feel emotionally exhausting instead of entertaining. Drama that once seemed normal now feels unbearable. You no longer desire constant attention or social approval in the same way. Your priorities shift toward peace, emotional stability, authenticity, purpose, and inner growth. And because of these changes, some relationships naturally begin fading. Not everyone can evolve alongside you. Some people are attached to the version of you that existed before your transformation began. They feel comfortable only when you remain emotionally predictable and familiar. But growth changes your boundaries, your standards, your energy, your values, and your vision for life. Sometimes people distance themselves from you not because you harm them, but because your evolution reminds them of the ways they have remained emotionally stagnant. Your growth unintentionally challenges their comfort. This process can feel heartbreaking because personal evolution often involves grieving relationships that are still physically present but emotionally disconnected. You may sit beside people you have known for years and quietly realize they no longer understand your inner world. The connection exists only through memory now, not emotional alignment. And while part of you mourns that loss, another part recognizes that forcing yourself to stay emotionally small in order to preserve outdated relationships would become a betrayal of your own growth. As you continue evolving, your tolerance for emotional chaos decreases significantly. You become more protective of your energy, your peace, your mental clarity, and your emotional health. You stop chasing people who repeatedly misunderstand your worth. You stop explaining yourself endlessly to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop sacrificing your emotional stability simply to avoid temporary loneliness. And although this path may initially leave you with fewer relationships, it also creates space for connections rooted in truth, maturity, emotional depth, and genuine alignment.